Hey, how's it going, Firebase developers? My name is Jen Person, and I'm kicking off this new series on cloud functions for Firebase. I'm going to assume you already know about using Firebase on Android, iOS, or the web. Any platform is okay, because we're going to start writing backend code for your Firebase app, so it doesn't matter what mobile platform your app is on. Cloud Functions is part of the Google Cloud Platform, and it lets you write and deploy code that responds to events from Google Cloud Services, including Firebase features that you might be using. With this, you can sort of glue together the parts of your app that are built on Firebase, and it all happens in the Google Cloud, not inside your mobile app. So this is a great way to keep your application logic centralized and safe, all without having to manage your own servers. That's right, you don't have to set up any servers, scale them up or down to meet user demand, or do any maintenance on them. You just write and deploy code. Some people call that serverless architecture because you never have to worry about or even know the servers that are running your code. The way it works with Firebase is that your code is triggered in response to events coming from Firebase features. For example, writes to your Firebase real-time database can trigger a function, as can new file uploads to your storage bucket. You can respond to new user authentication and conversion events in Firebase Analytics. Also, you can respond to incoming web requests over secure HTTP, and on top of all that, you can use Firebase Cloud Messaging to send push data to your users when one of these events occurs. Now there's a lot to unpack here, and it's more than I can cover in a single video, but I'll get you started deploying your first cloud function so you can experiment with it, and we'll do it in JavaScript running in the Node.js environment. If you don't know JavaScript, that's okay. Maybe now is a good time to start learning it. And we do plan on supporting more languages in the future. But before writing any code, let's go over the things you'll need to do first. First, set up a Firebase project if you haven't done so already. You can create one at the Firebase console with the link in the description. Next, you'll need to install Node on your computer. There are instructions for that if you go to nodejs.org. There are instructions for Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux. After you install Node, the instructions in this video are mostly the same for each platform. I'm using OS X, and I also happen to be using a package manager called Homebrew to make installation and upgrading easy. Whatever you choose, you should get a recent version of Node and make sure it gets installed in the path of your command shell. You can check your version on any system like this. You'll need at least version 6.3.1. Also, your Node installation should include npm, which stands for Node Package Manager. You can check the version of it too. Once you have Node installed, it's time to get the Firebase command line interface. You may already have this if you've worked with other Firebase features on the command line, but you should get the latest version to work with Cloud Functions. So let's do that. You can install the Firebase command line tools with npm like this. Be sure to use -g to install this module globally. On Linux, you may have to run it with sudo to make sure installation completes successfully. And when it's done, you can again check the version. Okay, now you have all the software installed to do development with Cloud Functions. It helps to keep these tools up to date so you can stay on top of future changes. The last tool you might want to think about is getting an editor for JavaScript. You can use any code editor you want, but I'm going to be using an editor called VS Code. After you've got all your development tools set up, you'll need to initialize a space to work on your Cloud Functions code. I'm going to use a new folder within my home directory. At the command line, I'm going to create and change the directory I want to use. In order to work with my Firebase project, I need to log in with an account that has access to it. The command Firebase login will kick that off and open a tab in Chrome. It's asking me for some permissions, and I'll allow it. Back to the command line, the next thing I need to do is run Firebase init to create some project scaffolding. When I do that, I get some awesome flaming Firebase. And then it asks me what I want to set up. Right now, I only want to set up functions, so I'm going to use the arrow keys and spacebar to deselect database and hosting, leaving only functions, then press enter to proceed. Now it's asking me which of my Firebase projects I want to deploy by default. I'm going to again use the arrow keys to choose the project I want, then press enter. It's going to create some files and folders here, and now it's asking me to install some dependencies with npm. I do want them because I'm going to use those modules to write functions, so I hit enter again and make that happen. What's happening now is the installation of those modules with npm, and the last thing it did was write a couple more files to configure my project. All the interesting stuff is in the functions directory that it created for me, so I'll jump in there. There's 3 important things here. First, package.json is a file used by Node to describe my project. You can see here that it has dependencies for Firebase admin and Firebase functions. These were the modules that NPM installed for me earlier, along with all of their dependencies. If I choose to install more dependencies, they'll show up here. Next, there's the folder called node_modules. This is where NPM put all those modules from earlier. You can see there's a big chunk of stuff here, and there's one thing to bear in mind about this folder. You probably don't want to check all this into your project source control. NPM is supposed to manage these for you. Since I don't want anything from this folder in my source control, I'm going to add it to a git ignore file so Git won't bother with them. Now, the last file is index.js. This is the entry point for defining all your cloud functions. You will most definitely start writing code here. So I'll open that with VS Code. To make this tutorial easy, I'm just going to uncomment the function here that it created for me. Of course, it's a Hello World sample. Let's walk through what it does. First, it requires the Firebase functions module. This gives me an object stored in the variable called functions. You will use this a lot. Then it exports a function called Hello World. It's implemented using the functions object from above, and it's an HTTP type function. HTTP functions let you respond to incoming web requests. When a web request occurs, my function triggers with a request and a response object. These are actually implemented using the Node module called Express. So if you know that, you'll be right at home here. Then, in the body of this function, I'm going to send a string back to the web client. That response ends the function. And that's all there is to it. Now I'll deploy this function to my project. Back at the command line, I can use the Firebase CLI to deploy, like this. You should know that it can take some time to deploy. The deployment speed should improve in the future as the Firebase team continues working on it. When the deploy finishes, it gives me a link to the console for my project, and also the URL for the HTTP function that I just created. Now, if I copy that URL, then paste it into my browser, it will invoke the cloud function, and I see the response it sent. I'll go back to the code and change the welcome message, and also add a log message, which I'll find later in the Firebase console. Then, I'll deploy the function again, just like last time, then reload the browser. Now I see the new message. To see where that log message went, I can go to the console for my project, select functions on the left, and choose to view logs for my Hello World function. And here, I can see my logged message. And that's your first cloud function, but there's so much more you can do with this, as I mentioned before. So to learn more about cloud functions for Firebase, be sure to read the documentation, follow our code lab, and check out our sample code in GitHub. The links are in the description below. And be sure to subscribe right here to the Firebase channel on YouTube to get notified of new Firecasts about cloud functions and other Firebase features. And I'll see you here next time.